She smiled at the funeral. Not a sad smile. Not the kind you give when you're trying to hold it together. A real smile. The kind that makes your eyes light up just a little too much. Her husband had been dead for less than 48 hours, and while everyone else sobbed into tissues and held each other up, Laura stood by the casket in a black dress that still had the tags tucked inside, checking her phone. The detective watching from the back of the room made a note in his pocket journal. 3 words. She's not crying. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who run. They're the ones who stay. They plan the memorial. They accept the condolences. They cash the check. This is the story of a woman who almost got away with the perfect murder and the tiny cracks in her performance that brought everything crashing down. What you're about to hear is real. Every detail, every lie, every cold, calculated move. And by the end, you'll question whether you really know the person sleeping next to you. David Harper was the kind of man people liked immediately. He had one of those faces that made you feel comfortable, like you'd known him for years even if you'd just met. He worked as a regional manager for a mid-sized logistics company in Charlotte, North Carolina. Not flashy, not famous, just reliable. The kind of guy who showed up early, stayed late, and never complained. He'd been married to Laura for 6 years. They'd met at a company mixer where she worked in HR for a consulting firm. She was sharp, well-dressed, always composed. Friends said they seemed like a solid match. David was the steady one. Laura was the ambitious one. Together, they looked like they had it figured out. They bought a 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb with good schools. Even though they didn't have kids yet. They talked about starting a family someday. David wanted 2. Laura said she wasn't ready, but she never said no. Just not yet. On the surface, everything looked fine, better than fine. They took weekend trips, posted smiling photos on social media, attended neighborhood barbecues, but if you looked closer, really closer, you'd see the small things. The way Laura's smile never quite reached her eyes in pictures. The way David sometimes seemed tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. The way she'd answer his calls with a sigh before picking up. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened, you have to understand who Laura Miller was before she became Laura Harper. She grew up in a middle-class family in Virginia. Her father was an accountant. Her mother was a school librarian. She was the youngest of 3 kids and by far the most driven. While her siblings were content with average grades and normal lives, Laura wanted more. She wanted the kind of life she saw in magazines, the kind where you didn't have to check your bank account before buying something, where vacations weren't just a week at the beach but trips to Europe, stays in 5-star hotels, dinners that cost more than her childhood monthly grocery bill. She was smart enough to get into a decent college on a partial scholarship. She studied business administration and graduated with honors. But the job offers she got weren't the ones she wanted. She didn't want to climb the ladder slowly. She didn't want to wait 10 years to make 6 figures. She wanted it now. And when she met David, she thought maybe she'd found a shortcut. He wasn't rich, but he was stable. He had a decent salary, a retirement account, good credit. He was the kind of man you could build something with, even if the foundation was a little boring. At first, she tried to love him, really love him. She told herself that stability was enough, that comfort was underrated, that maybe she didn't need the fairy tale, just the security. But 6 years in, the cracks were showing. David started noticing things. She was distant. She spent more time on her phone. She'd go out with friends and come home late, smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't his. When he asked where she'd been, she'd get defensive, accuse him of not trusting her, turn it around so that he was the one apologizing. One night, about 8 months before he died, David sat her down in their kitchen. The same kitchen where they'd shared coffee every morning for years. He asked her directly if she was happy, if she still wanted to be married. Laura looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. That same smile. The one that didn't reach her eyes. She told him she was fine. that she was just stressed. Work was hard. Life was hard. But they were fine. David wanted to believe her. So he did. He ignored the gut feeling that told him something was wrong. He ignored the way she flinched when he touched her. He ignored the fact that they hadn't been intimate in months. He told himself it was a phase, that all marriages go through rough patches. He even suggested couples therapy. Laura said she'd think about it. She never brought it up again. What David didn't know was that Laura had already made her decision. She wasn't leaving him. Leaving meant splitting assets, losing the house, starting over with less. No, she wasn't leaving. She was planning something else. Something that would give her everything she wanted and make sure David couldn't ask for anything ever again. It started with a simple Google search on a Tuesday afternoon while David was at work. She used her laptop, incognito mode. She typed in the words slowly, as if even the keyboard might judge her. How much life insurance is suspicious? She scrolled through the results. Read articles about policies, about payouts, about investigations. Then she searched again. Can life insurance companies deny payout? And then, a few days later, accidental death versus natural causes, which pays more. She didn't write anything down. She didn't tell anyone. She just absorbed the information like she was studying for an exam. And in a way she was. 3 months before David died, Laura did something unusual. She sat down with him one evening after dinner and brought up the topic of life insurance. David was surprised. They already had small policies through their jobs, $25,000 each, enough to cover a funeral and some bills. But Laura said it wasn't enough. She'd been reading articles online, she told him. Articles about how many families go bankrupt after losing a spouse, how medical bills pile up, how mortgages go unpaid. She said she didn't want that for them. She wanted to make sure they were protected. David thought it made sense. He didn't love talking about death, but he understood the logic. Laura suggested they each get a policy. $500,000, enough to cover the house, the cars, everything. David agreed. He loved her. He trusted her. Why wouldn't he? They scheduled an appointment with an insurance agent the following week. The agent, a woman in her 50s named Patricia, walked them through the paperwork. She asked the standard questions: health history, smoking, drinking, high-risk hobbies. David was in good health, no major issues, non-smoker, didn't drink much. The policy was approved within 2 weeks. Laura's policy took a little longer. She had a minor pre-existing condition, nothing serious, but it required extra paperwork. She didn't seem bothered. In fact, she seemed relieved that David's went through so quickly. Patricia remembered that later. How Laura had smiled when she handed David his policy documents. How she'd folded them carefully and placed them in her purse. How she'd asked, almost casually, how soon a policy could pay out after a death. Patricia told her it depended. Usually 30 to 60 days, assuming there were no red flags. Laura nodded, thanked her, shook her hand, and left. David never thought about the policy again. For him, it was just something responsible adults did, like getting an oil change or updating a will. But for Laura, it was the cornerstone of a plan that had been forming in her mind for months. She didn't want to divorce David. She wanted him gone, completely, permanently, and she wanted to walk away with everything: the house, the cars, the savings, and $500,000 in tax-free insurance money. All she had to do was make it look like an accident. She started researching methods, not all at once, not in a way that would seem obvious if anyone ever checked her search history. She spaced it out. She used different devices: her phone, her work laptop, public library computers. She searched for things like household accidents, carbon monoxide poisoning, food allergies, medication overdoses. She read forums, watched videos, took mental notes. She wasn't impulsive. She wasn't reckless. She was patient, methodical. She knew that the key to getting away with murder wasn't the act itself. It was the story you told afterward. And Laura was very, very good at telling stories. She'd been doing it her whole life. Telling her parents she was studying when she was out with friends. Telling her bosses she was working late when she was meeting someone else. telling David she loved him when she'd already decided he had to die. Lying for Laura wasn't hard. It was survival. It was strategy. It was how she got what she wanted. And what she wanted now was a life without David and a bank account with 6 zeros. What made everything more complicated, and ultimately more damning, was that Laura wasn't acting alone. Not in the planning, not in the motive. There was someone else. His name was Marcus Reed. Laura had met him about a year before David's death at a professional networking event in downtown Charlotte. Marcus was a financial consultant, tall, confident, the kind of man who wore expensive watches and drove a leased BMW. He wasn't more handsome than David. He wasn't kinder or funnier. But he had something David didn't. Ambition, flash, the promise of a life that felt bigger. They started talking that night, exchanged numbers. Laura told herself it was just networking, professional. But within 2 weeks they were meeting for coffee, then lunch, then dinner, then hotel rooms. Marcus didn't ask if she was married. He saw the ring. He didn't care. And Laura didn't pretend to feel guilty. For her, the affair wasn't about love. It was about escape, about feeling alive, about imagining a version of her life where she didn't have to pretend to be satisfied with ordinary. Marcus listened when she complained about David. He nodded sympathetically when she said she felt trapped. And one night, after a few too many glasses of wine, Laura said something she shouldn't have. She said she wished David would just disappear. Marcus laughed. He thought she was joking. But Laura didn't laugh. She just looked at him, and something shifted in the air between them. Over the next few months, their conversations got darker. Laura started talking about the life insurance policy, about how much it was worth, about how she'd be set for life if something happened to David. Marcus didn't suggest anything directly. He was too smart for that. But he didn't shut her down either. He played along, asked questions. How would someone even do something like that? Wouldn't the insurance company investigate? What if you got caught? Laura had answers for all of it. She'd thought it through. She told Marcus she wasn't stupid. She wasn't going to do anything obvious. It had to look natural, or accidental, something that wouldn't raise red flags. Marcus listened. And then one night, he told her something that changed everything. He told her that if she went through with it, if she actually did this, he wanted in, not to help. He wasn't going to be involved. But he wanted a cut. He said if she was going to risk everything, she shouldn't have to spend the money alone. Laura didn't agree right away, but she didn't say no. Because the truth was, she liked the idea of having someone waiting on the other side. Someone who knew what she'd done and didn't judge her for it. Someone who wanted the same thing she did. So she made him a promise. She told him that when the money came through, they'd leave Charlotte together. Start fresh somewhere else. California, maybe. Or Florida. Somewhere warm. Somewhere far from the life she'd been living. Marcus smiled, kissed her, and told her to be careful. Laura promised she would be, but promises, like everything else Laura said, didn't mean much. Laura spent weeks considering her options. She couldn't use anything violent, no guns, no knives, nothing that would leave evidence or suggest foul play. It had to be something quiet, something that could be explained away. She thought about poison, but that would show up in an autopsy. She thought about staging a fall, but that felt too risky. What if he survived? What if someone saw? Then she found it. The answer she'd been looking for. Medication. David had been prescribed sleeping pills a few months earlier. Nothing major. Just something to help him sleep during a stressful period at work. He didn't take them often. Most nights the bottle just sat in the medicine cabinet, untouched. But Laura noticed, and she started reading about overdose symptoms, about how sedatives mixed with alcohol could cause respiratory failure, about how it could look like someone just took too much by accident. She started small. She began making David drinks at night. Whiskey, his favorite. She'd pour it in a glass with ice, bring it to him while he watched TV, and sit beside him like a dutiful wife. He thought it was sweet, thought maybe she was trying to reconnect. Laura encouraged him to relax, told him he worked too hard, told him he deserved to unwind, and after a few drinks, when he was drowsy and heavy-eyed, She'd suggest he take a sleeping pill. Just one. To help him sleep better. David didn't think twice. Why would he? It was his wife. The person he'd vowed to spend his life with. The person who was supposed to protect him. But Laura wasn't protecting him. She was testing him, watching how his body responded, seeing how much he could take before he got too tired to stay awake. And one night, she decided it was time. It was a Friday. David had come home from work, exhausted. He'd had a long week, a difficult project. His boss had been on his case. Laura greeted him at the door with a smile. She'd made his favorite dinner, steak, mashed potatoes, a bottle of red wine. David was surprised, touched. He kissed her on the cheek and asked what the occasion was. Laura said there was no occasion. She just wanted to do something nice for him. They ate together, talked, laughed. For a moment it almost felt like the early days, like when they first met and everything was easy. David finished 2 glasses of wine, then a third. Laura kept refilling his glass, kept the conversation light, kept him distracted. After dinner, they moved to the living room. David sat on the couch. Laura brought him another drink, whiskey this time. He sipped it slowly, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. He was tired, so tired. Laura sat beside him, rubbed his shoulders, told him he should go to bed soon, get some real rest. David agreed, but before he got up, Laura handed him something, 2 sleeping pills. She said he looked like he needed them, that he'd sleep better. David hesitated for just a second. Then he swallowed them, washed them down with the last of his whiskey, and went upstairs. Laura waited. She sat on the couch, staring at the TV without really watching it. Her heart was pounding, her hands were shaking, but her face was calm. After an hour, she went upstairs. David was in bed, asleep. His breathing was slow, heavy. Laura stood in the doorway and watched him. She thought about turning around, about waking him up, about calling for help. But then she thought about the life insurance, about Marcus, about the house in California with the ocean view, and she closed the door. She went back downstairs, poured herself a glass of wine, and waited. At some point during the night, David stopped breathing. His body, overwhelmed by the combination of alcohol and sedatives, simply shut down. It was quiet, peaceful even. He didn't suffer. He didn't know. By the time the sun came up, he was gone. And Laura was a widow. Laura called 911 at 6:30 in the morning. Her voice on the recording was shaky, panicked, perfect. She told the operator she'd woken up and found her husband unresponsive, that she'd tried to wake him, but he wouldn't move, that she didn't know what to do. The operator told her to stay calm, asked if he was breathing. Laura said she didn't think so. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They found David in bed, cold to the touch, no pulse, no signs of trauma. Laura stood in the hallway, crying into her hands. One of the paramedics asked her what happened. Laura said she didn't know, that he'd been fine the night before, that they'd had dinner, that he'd gone to bed, that she'd woken up and he was just gone. The paramedic nodded, told her he was sorry. They called the coroner. Because there was no obvious cause of death, an autopsy would be required. Laura nodded, said she understood. She asked if she could see him one more time. They let her. She stood beside the bed, looking down at David's body, and for just a moment, her mask slipped, not into sadness, into something else, relief. One of the paramedics noticed. He didn't say anything, but he remembered. The funeral was held 4 days later. It was a small service. David's family came in from out of state. His mother sobbed through the entire ceremony. His father stood stone-faced, gripping the back of a pew. Laura stood at the front, dressed in black, accepting condolences. She thanked people for coming, said all the right things. But she didn't cry. Not once. David's brother, Kyle, noticed. After the service, he pulled her aside, asked if she was okay. Laura said she was in shock. that it hadn't hit her yet. Kyle wanted to believe her, but something felt off. He couldn't put his finger on it, just a feeling, a sense that his brother's wife wasn't acting the way a grieving widow should. He mentioned it to his mother. She told him grief affects people differently, that Laura was probably just trying to stay strong. Kyle nodded, but he didn't stop thinking about it. 2 weeks after the funeral, Laura filed the life insurance claim. She filled out the paperwork carefully, submitted David's death certificate, included a letter from his doctor confirming he'd been prescribed sleeping medication. She made sure everything was in order. Then she waited. The insurance company had 60 days to process the claim. Laura wasn't worried. She'd been careful. She'd covered her tracks. And in the meantime, she stayed in touch with Marcus. They didn't see each other in person. Too risky. But they texted, late at night, making plans, talking about the future. Laura told him it was almost over, that soon they'd be free. But Laura had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated how closely insurance companies investigate large payouts, especially when the insured dies within a year of taking out the policy, and she'd underestimated the instincts of a detective named Raymond Cole. Detective Cole had been with the Charlotte Police Department for 17 years. He'd seen a lot of deaths, a lot of grief, and a lot of lies. When the medical examiner's report came across his desk, something caught his eye. David Harper's toxicology report showed high levels of sedatives and alcohol in his system, not enough to be ruled a definitive overdose, but enough to raise questions. The medical examiner had marked the cause of death as undetermined, pending further investigation. That's when Cole decided to take a closer look. He started with Laura. He called her in for a routine interview. Just a formality, he told her. Laura agreed. She came in wearing a navy dress and pearl earrings, polite, composed. Cole asked her to walk him through the night David died. Laura repeated the same story she'd told the paramedics: dinner, wine, bed. She woke up and he was gone. Cole nodded, took notes. Then he asked a question that made Laura's stomach tighten. He asked if David had been depressed, if he'd ever talked about hurting himself. Laura said no, absolutely not. David was happy. They were happy. Cole watched her face, watched the way her hands gripped the edge of the table, and he knew. He didn't have proof yet, but he knew. Something was wrong. Detective Cole started digging. He requested David's phone records, his bank statements, his work emails, and then he requested Laura's. That's when things started to unravel. Laura's phone records showed hundreds of texts and calls to a number that didn't belong to David. The number belonged to Marcus Reed. Cole ran a background check. Financial consultant. No criminal record. But when Cole called him in for questioning, Marcus got nervous. He said he and Laura were just friends, that they'd met at a networking event, that it was nothing serious. Cole didn't believe him. He asked Marcus where he was the night David died. Marcus said he was home, alone, no alibi. Cole made a note. Then he went back to Laura's phone. He got a warrant for her text messages, and what he found was damning. Messages between Laura and Marcus talking about the future, about leaving Charlotte, about money. There was one message in particular that stood out, sent 3 weeks before David's death. Laura had written, "Soon, just a little longer, then we're free." Marcus had replied, "I'm ready when you are." Cole showed the messages to the district attorney. They agreed there was enough for a warrant. They searched Laura's house, her car, her laptop, and that's when they found it. Her search history. All of it. The searches about life insurance, about overdoses, about accidental death. She'd tried to delete it, but nothing is ever really gone. The forensic team recovered everything. Laura was arrested 6 weeks after David's death. She was at home when the police arrived. She didn't resist, didn't ask questions, just stood there, calm as ever, while they read her rights. At the station, Cole asked her if she wanted to make a statement. Laura said no. She wanted a lawyer. Smart move. But it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. The district attorney charged her with first-degree murder, premeditated, calculated, and motivated by financial gain. The trial took 8 months to begin. During that time, Laura sat in jail. No bail, too much of a flight risk. Marcus, meanwhile, cut a deal. He agreed to testify against Laura in exchange for immunity. He told the jury everything, the affair, the conversations, the plan. He said Laura had been the mastermind, that he'd never thought she'd actually go through with it. The jury didn't buy his innocence, but his testimony sealed Laura's fate. The prosecution laid out the case piece by piece, the life insurance policy, the search history, the text messages, the toxicology report. They brought in expert witnesses who explained how the combination of alcohol and sedatives could cause respiratory failure, how it could look accidental, but wasn't. They showed the jury photos of David, smiling, alive, happy, and then they showed them Laura, cold, emotionless, a woman who'd murdered her husband for money. Laura's defense tried to argue that David's death was accidental, that he'd taken the pills himself, that Laura had no way of knowing he'd taken too many. But the evidence didn't support it. The bottle of sleeping pills was nearly full. David had only been prescribed them 3 months earlier. If he'd been taking them regularly, there would have been fewer left, and the amount in his system was more than a normal dose. Much more. The defense also tried to paint Marcus as the real villain. They said he'd manipulated Laura, pressured her, but the text messages showed otherwise. Laura had been the one leading the conversations, making the plans. She wasn't a victim, she was the architect. On the final day of testimony, Laura took the stand. Her lawyer advised against it, but Laura insisted. She wanted to tell her side. She sat in the witness box, hands folded, and told the jury she loved David, that she would never hurt him, that his death was a tragedy she'd never recover from. She cried, real tears this time, but the jury had already made up their minds. They'd seen the evidence, they'd heard the testimony, and they didn't believe her. The prosecutor asked Laura one final question. "Did you kill your husband for money?" Laura looked directly at the jury and said, "No." But her eyes told a different story. She sat in court, calm and expressionless, as prosecutors read the evidence. The Google searches, the text messages, the bank records. She didn't look up once. Not when they showed photos of David. Not when they played the 911 call. Not when Marcus testified against her. She just sat there, hands in her lap, staring straight ahead, like she was watching a movie about someone else's life. But just when prosecutors thought they had her, one final twist would shock the courtroom. During the closing arguments, the prosecution revealed something they'd been holding back. A second life insurance policy, one that Laura had taken out on David 3 months after the first. This one was smaller, only $100,000. But here's the thing. The beneficiary wasn't Laura. It was Marcus Reed. Laura had listed him as a partial beneficiary, claiming he was a business partner. The insurance company had flagged it during their investigation and reported it to the police. When confronted, Marcus admitted he'd known about it, that Laura had told him it was his share for keeping quiet, for being there when it was over. The jury was stunned. Even Laura's lawyer looked shocked. This wasn't just about greed. It was about planning, about manipulation, about a woman who had orchestrated every detail down to the last dollar. The defense had no response. Laura's calm facade finally cracked. She looked at Marcus across the courtroom, and for the first time, real emotion showed on her face. Not sadness, not regret, rage, pure, unfiltered rage. She'd been betrayed by the one person she thought was on her side. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was silent. The forewoman stood, read the verdict, guilty, first-degree murder. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. When that day came, David's mother spoke. She told the court about her son, about the kind of man he was, about how he'd loved Laura, trusted her, how he'd never seen it coming. She looked directly at Laura and asked her why. Laura didn't answer. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The $500,000 policy was nullified. The insurance company refused to pay out, citing fraud and criminal activity. David's family received nothing. But they said that didn't matter. What mattered was that justice had been served. As Laura was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she looked back one last time. Not at David's family, not at the judge, at Marcus. He looked away, and just like that, it was over. The woman who thought she could get away with the perfect murder was going to spend the rest of her life in a cell. All because of a few Google searches, a few text messages, a few lies that unraveled under scrutiny. So what do we take away from this? Laura Miller wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. She didn't act out of rage or passion. She wasn't mentally ill. She was simply a woman who wanted more than she had and was willing to do anything to get it. She believed she was smarter than everyone else, that she could manipulate the system, that she could lie her way through life and never face consequences. And for a while, it worked. But the truth has a way of coming out. It always does. Whether it's a text message you thought you deleted, a search history you thought was private, or a person you thought you could trust. The truth finds a way. David Harper was a good man. He worked hard. He loved his wife. He trusted the wrong person, and it cost him his life. His family will never get him back. They'll never hear his laugh again, never get another phone call, never have another holiday together. All because Laura decided his life was worth less than $500,000. Think about that for a moment. Think about the people in your life, the ones you trust, the ones you love. How well do you really know them? How much do you really see? Laura's neighbors thought she was a wonderful wife. David's co-workers thought they were the perfect couple. Even David himself didn't see it coming until it was too late. We like to think we'd recognize danger, that we'd see the signs. But the reality is, the most dangerous people are often the ones who seem the most normal, the ones who smile at you over dinner, the ones who kiss you goodnight, the ones who hold your hand and promise forever. Laura Harper promised David forever, and she kept that promise, just not the way he thought she would. Love built on lies always ends in tragedy. For Laura Miller, the cost of greed wasn't $500,000. It was everything: her freedom, her future, her humanity. She'll spend the rest of her life behind bars, surrounded by people who know exactly what she did. And every night, when she closes her eyes, she'll have to live with the fact that she murdered the one person who truly loved her. Was it worth it? You'd have to ask her. But I think we already know the answer. The question isn't whether justice was served. It was. The question is whether we learn anything from it, whether we recognize that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the person across the breakfast table, the person who knows your routines, your passwords, your vulnerabilities, the person you'd never suspect. Because that's exactly what they're counting on. David Harper trusted his wife, and it killed him. Don't let that be your story. What do you think? Was justice served in the Laura Miller case? Would you have spotted the red flags earlier? Let us know in the comments. And here's a harder question. If you were in David's position, would you have seen it coming? Would you have noticed the distance, the coldness, the little changes that added up to something horrific? Or would you have done what David did and trusted the person you loved? It's easy to say we'd be smarter, that we'd be more careful, but the truth is most of us wouldn't, because we want to believe the best in people, especially the people we love. And that's exactly what makes us vulnerable. If this story shocked you, wait until you hear about the husband who faked his own death to frame his wife. That's coming next. You won't believe how far he went to destroy her life, and how one mistake brought the whole plan crashing down. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe for more real-life crime twists. And remember, sometimes the people we trust most are the ones we should fear the most. Stay safe out there, and never stop questioning, because the truth, no matter how ugly, is always better than a beautiful lie. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.